After months of bitter fighting, the British and Americans have seized key towns in southern Italy, but are now stalled, with Rome still firmly in German hands. The Allied campaign is going nowhere. In a crisis meeting, Churchill tries to persuade Eisenhower that there is only one way to break through.
What specifically Prime Minister Winston Churchill of Britain decided to do was, if we're going to find it hard to force our way northward, let's use our great naval and air power advantage to pick up troops and carry them northward of the German defensive lines, land them near the Italian capital of Rome, and force the Germans to retreat.
Churchill wants to land a massive force at the port of Anzio near Rome, punching into the German flank to create a second front. The hope is this will heap pressure on the existing German defensive position, the Gustav Line, almost 100 kilometers south.
The idea is to draw German reinforcements away from the Monte Cassino area and the Gustav Line, which is where the Allies are going to be making attacks at the same time.
Churchill believes the daring amphibious assault could take the enemy completely by surprise and, if successful, leave another massively important Allied objective open to capture.
If we don't draw German reinforcements away from the Gustav Line, those forces at Anzio may be able to threaten, possibly even take Rome, which is only 20 miles away.
Churchill's plan, codenamed Operation Shingle, gets the go-ahead. But few are under any illusions about the risks involved. The Allies are haunted by the carnage at another amphibious operation, only a few months earlier. The assault on Salerno, just along the coast from Anzio, cost 1,800 lives. And there's another problem, right at the heart of the Allied top brass. The general tasked with masterminding Shingle for the US Fifth Army is the hugely ambitious and prickly Mark Clark. His superior is the British Field Marshal Sir Harold Alexander, the supreme Allied commander of the Mediterranean. The two generals should be a dream team. The trouble is, they just don't get on.
Mark Clark, the American commander, is everything that Alexander is not. Mark Clark is loud where Alexander is seemingly without ego. Mark Clark is more concerned than anything else with how he appears and with his reputation and with getting credit for things that he had done. Putting Clark and Alexander together is like mixing oil and water. They just don't fit with each other. We're always arguing and squabbling and trying to push each other out of the picture. It's one of the classic cases where the generals are fighting each other sometimes more than they're actually fighting the enemy.
As if that was not bad enough, making Operation Shingle a reality is given to a general ill-suited to the task.
The American general, John Lucas, who was in charge of the operation, was kind of a naturally dour and pessimistic guy. He had his own doubts about the entire operation, whether the Germans would have defended the harbor at Anzio more effectively, and whether the whole plan would actually just send his forces into a death trap.
To make matters worse for the Allies, facing them is General Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, one of the most talented military leaders in the Reich.
He not only understands the use of armed land forces, he understands the use of artillery. Italy is very much an artillery-orientated theatre because you use the limestone rock as shrapnel, bouncing shells off these hard rocks.
Heading to Anzio is a young British paratrooper, Private Albert Darlington. It will be his second amphibious assault. At the age of just 17, he is already a veteran of the bloody landings at Salerno.
The first shooting I saw was on the beaches of Salerno. You run out onto the beach, and we ran into deep water, whereas you run into water up to your knees, and we ran into water and it went up to here. So you're getting panicking, throwing equipment about. And anyway, finally you get ashore, you're being fired at now, you see. If the bloke up there with a machine gun does a bit of spraying on you, you're likely to catch one. You get down as quick as you can and get off the beach. That was the first shooting I ever come across.
Just getting men on shore in an amphibious assault involves an exceptionally well-coordinated and planned approach.
Amphibious operations, the reason they're incredibly difficult is that you have to have several services work together. Trying to get different regiments to work together is hard enough. Trying to get different services, such as the Army, the Air Force and the Navy, to work together for one goal is nigh on impossible.
Churchill wants the Anglo-American attack to be quick and powerful and deal a fatal blow to the Germans. But there are more important priorities competing for the men and weapons needed to make the attack at Anzio possible. Allied commanders are focused not on Italy, but on the imminent Normandy landings. And when practice landings for Operation Shingle go badly, confidence among the commanders starts to wane.
I have the bare minimum of ships and craft. The ones that are sunk cannot be replaced. The force that can be gotten ashore in a hurry is weak, and I haven't sufficient artillery to hold me over.
With a slender but agile force, Lucas has to decide between a bold dash into Italy or a slower, more careful approach. And for the Allies, the recent memory of the disastrous Salerno landings is never far away.
Mark Clark, when he landed in September 1943, struck out from the Salerno beachhead and was counterattacked immediately. And Mark Clark's passing comment to John Lucas before the latter invaded Anzio was, "Don't stick your neck out too far, Johnny. I did at Salerno and I nearly got it bitten off." So what Clark is saying to Lucas is caution.
And Lucas is all too aware of the optimism surrounding him. An optimism he does not share.
The general idea seems to be that the Germans are licked and are fleeing in disorder, and nothing remains but to mop up. I haven't seen the desperate fighting I have during the last 4 months without learning something. We are not, repeat not, in Rome yet. They will end up by putting me ashore with inadequate forces and get me in a serious jam. Then who will take the blame?
Lucas demands more time, but he is overruled. He asks for more amphibious landing craft. He is overruled again. The date for the attack is set, the 22nd of January, 1944.
The main part of the amphibious assault is unarmed vessels. They are the ones who are carrying the troops, who are carrying the supplies, who are carrying the fuel, who are carrying the ammunition, which is the vast proportion of any amphibious fleet looking for an assault. Giving your support. You have the actual fighting elements themselves, and all they are is mobile gun platforms. So it is the rocket ships, destroyers, it's the monitors, it's the cruisers, the battleships, who are there to lay down as much fire on their targets on the shore as humanly possible. So act as seaborne artillery, firing in just as on land.
Two infantry divisions will make up the first assault, and both have illustrious records. The British 1st have been fighting from Dunkirk to North Africa. The American 3rd are veterans of Tunisia and Sicily.
Amphibious operations at Anzio comes down to what are very, very small landing craft, typically with a couple of platoons, 50 to 60 guys, who then are the ones that when the ramp goes down, they're hitting the beach and actually making the the first assault.
On Saturday, the 22nd of January 1944, Operation Shingle is launched. With the slaughter on the beaches of Salerno still fresh in their minds, young Albert Darlington and his comrades are braced for the worst.
Well, no good saying I wasn't scared, because there's no way you can't be scared if you're getting... Blokes are dropping down with blood everywhere, and you know he's bloody hell. You know, you're worried, you're scared. But the thing is to keep moving, you get moving and get down behind something, so you can get some protection. A rock, big lump of sand, anything. And eventually, if you're lucky, you get ashore.
36,000 men will land at Anzio to make Churchill's daring plan a reality. None of them has any idea of what faces them.
At about 0140 hours, we heard shell fire from the ships in the invasion group. Funny thing, we didn't hear any gunfire coming from the beach. I started going down the ramp. With my rifle over my head, I went in.
Braced for a huge German force on the beach, the troops are in for a surprise.
The shock for the Allied attacking force at Anzio was actually how easy it was.
There was hardly any shots fired. I don't think there was any Germans about to shoot at us.
The harbor was pretty much unoccupied by German forces, and even the ring of hills that surrounded Anzio were pretty much uncovered by any defensive setups.
The troops seem to have landed behind enemy lines in one of the easiest amphibious assaults in the entire war.
The idea that Winston Churchill had worked. They had surprised the Germans. They had managed to get a major force on the ground behind the German defensive lines, and the road to Rome was open.
Allied commanders can't believe their luck. They've caught Hitler napping and stand a chance of getting him out of Italy for good. The reason for the lack of opposition will only become clear much later.
During the entire war, intelligence very often got it wrong. It's one of the real weak spots of the Germans. Kesselring is given intelligence information by the German intelligence service that he does not have to fear an Allied invasion in the Mediterranean. Relying on this information, Kesselring does not really worry too much about his flanks.
Kesselring's error is a gift for the Allied invasion. Anzio and its hinterland is wide open. General Lucas has a choice: to charge into the heart of Italy with a slender force, or hold tight and consolidate his gains. It's an agonizing decision.
What does he do? So he could break out immediately and head for Rome. Very short distance away, hardly any Germans in the vicinity. But what happens? He's been told to be cautious. He is a cautious man by nature. So he decides to build up his reserves, get all his logistics in place first.
But caution risks wasting the opportunity offered by the success of the landings and Kesselring's misstep. Lucas's military superiors, Clark and Alexander, look on anxiously, wondering when their general at Anzio will strike inland.
Lucas's decision to consolidate his beachhead militarily has got a lot to support it. However, in the circumstances where no resistance to the landing and very, very little German troop movement in front of him, the opportunity was ripe to launch an all-out attack and to get his men and equipment into the hinterland as quickly as possible
And then strike out towards the enemy.
It was most definitely the wrong military decision to take.
Lucas essentially quibbled. The Germans never had a problem with reacting quickly and decisively, and this is a spectacularly good comparison of that between the two armies.
Kesselring may have been fed bad intelligence, but he knows exactly how to respond to the Allies' surprise assault.
When he learns of the Allied landing at Anzio, only 2 hours later, the German reserves that are being held back are set in motion in order to contain or drive the Allied forces back into the sea.
As they take in the situation at the beachhead, Lucas and Clark estimate German troops will take 6 days to arrive in any significant force. It will be a catastrophic misjudgment.
It only takes 2 hours for the first 2 divisions to arrive on the Anzio battlefront. Can only be explained with the general ability of the German army at that particular time to really pull forces together.
From every corner of occupied Italy, German troops, armor and supplies race south. This speed is made possible by a formidable logistical framework.
The whole secret of understanding the German armed forces is railways. By 1944, with all the occupied lands, the Germans have the use of about 50,000 locomotives and 3 million pieces of rolling stock. I mean, that is awesome use of railways. Kesselring just says, flood the front with as many spare troops, don't care where they come from. We need troops defending Rome against this landing in Anzio. They've got to come from wherever. And the railways pound with endless freight cars and passenger cars transporting troops and all their equipment to Anzio.
Within a week, a landscape that was almost devoid of German troops is crammed with over 70,000 of them.
You've got this staggering number of German forces that have collected, and they outnumber Lucas's. And Lucas, all of a sudden, cautious by nature, is like the rabbit staring at the headlights. He's frozen into inactivity.
The Allies have lost all of their initial advantage, and the Anzio attack now risks disaster before it has really begun. Within 3 days of the landings, nearly 2 full divisions of German troops are advancing on Anzio. Under the exceptional leadership of a star Wehrmacht General Eberhard von Mackensen, the Germans construct an iron wall around Anzio, made up of elite paratroops, battle-hardened panzer grenadiers, and panzer units. Lucas, prodded into action by his superiors, orders an advance to take key strategic points around a pre-planned perimeter in the Anzio hinterland. Even now, the Allies would seem to have a fair chance of victory, despite the strengthening German numbers.
From an Allied perspective, one, they had manpower, a lot of it, and they could ship more in. And of course, naval gunpower, battleships, cruisers, monitors, you name it, which could then bring down very, very heavy fire on the defenders. They also had complete mastery of the air. On the German side, they didn't have sea power and they didn't have air power, but they had the high ground, and at Anzio that was key. And it allowed them to use what assets they had, which was artillery, infantry cannon, howitzers and so on, to put them in emplacements on top of those hills and bring down accurate fire onto the Allies' beachhead.
Lucas orders an attack on Aprilia. He hopes to make this a defensive stronghold, but finds his enemy well established in the village.
You know, the Germans are well stuck in, and we've been shelling it and doing no good. And we make an attack on it and the Germans go out. But they did a counterattack on us and we shifted. We run for it. When they did one of their famous counterattacks, it was pretty scary. And if you weren't sort of geared up for it, the first reaction was drop everything and run for it.
Aprilia is eventually taken in bitter urban fighting. The Allies forced to clear the houses one by one.
Going into buildings was always risky when you burst through a door. You didn't know whether it was booby-trapped for a start. What you do, you lob grenades in first through all the windows. As many as you can, yeah. And then burst in, hoping that everybody inside has got their head down now. They ain't going to be worried watching the door. Burst through the door, then spray around, blast everybody, and then take a breath and look what's what. You know, that was the technique of house clearing. Wasn't very technical, but it worked. That was the way to do it if you wanted to stay alive.
The Allies now take the offensive, driving forward in a double assault against the villages of Cisterna and Campo Leone. The British 3rd Infantry Brigade, including the Sherwood Foresters, spearhead the attack on Campo Leone. They find a railway line barring their way, a perfect infantry trap targeted by the Germans. Again and again, the Sherwood Foresters rush the line, and again they are cut down.
Such a lack of information and no cover. Shells screaming and whirring like mad, vicious witches. Sprays of fire all over the place. Shrapnel like hail. Bullets whizzing from nowhere. And on top of that, the bloody rain. We were so cold. Half the soldiers disappeared, mown down, captured, everything you can imagine.
General Harman's 1st Armoured Division drives up in support. There, the general discovers the reason for the Foresters' slow progress.
There were dead bodies everywhere. I had never seen so many dead men in one place. They lay so close together that I had to step with care. I shouted for the commanding officer. From a foxhole, there arose a mud-covered corporal. He was the highest-ranking officer still alive. He stood stiffly to attention. "How's it going?" I asked. "Well, sir," the corporal said, "there were 116 of us in our company when we first came up, and there are 16 of us left."
The losses of the Sherwood Foresters are terrible. Their battalion commander and every single company commander are killed, and of 820 men, 560 are casualties. General Harman would later write,
"I think my great respect for the stubbornness and fighting ability of the British enlisted man was born that afternoon."
Now it is the turn of the elite US Rangers to take Cisterna. They're led by the man who created the unit, the charismatic Colonel William Darby.
During World War II, the Americans are learning best practice from the British, and one of the things they particularly like are elite, commando-trained, super-fit young men whose job is to infiltrate behind the lines but in large groups and cause huge havoc to the Germans.
Colonel Darby is ordered to take 2 battalions to seize Cisterna. His men are highly motivated, but have already been on the front line for a week with little sleep or time to prepare. On the 30th of January, the Rangers move into action.
They are deployed to patrol along a river line and infiltrate really behind the German lines.
As dawn breaks, the Rangers are creeping through ditches, knifing and bayoneting German sentries as they close on Cisterna. Then, with the village less than half a kilometre away, all hell breaks loose.
There are more Germans in the vicinity than they realise. They're surrounded in unfavourable terrain, overwhelmed, defeated, and almost all of them are killed or captured.
Unknown to the Allies, just a day earlier, a veteran force of Panzer Grenadiers has been brought in to toughen up the defense of Cisterna. The Americans were spotted early, but the Grenadiers did not attack immediately. Instead, they allowed the Rangers to move deep into their territory before moving in for the kill. From the Rangers' 1st and 3rd Battalions, only 6 men return. The rest are killed or captured.
The effect on the Americans is huge. This is a real dent to American pride. It's also the loss of very highly skilled, well-trained troops and all their equipment at a time when manpower is short in the Mediterranean and Anzio is seen to be going wrong.
German propaganda goes into overdrive, parading the captured Rangers through Rome. The cream of America's special forces become a regular feature in the Nazi newsreels.
Kampffront Süditalien. Der britisch-nordamerikanische Landekopf von Nettuno, von dem aus der Feind Rom erobern wollte, wurde von unseren Truppen weiter eingeengt. In den Kämpfen im Abschnitt Nettuno wurden bisher über 4000 Gefangene gemacht. Eine Einheit der Angloamerikaner marschiert in Rom ein. Auch diesmal kommen sie nicht als Sieger, sondern als Gefangene.
The Germans, I don't think, ever really realise what they've achieved. The effect has a real force multiplier on the Americans, who take this extraordinarily badly. It exaggerates the effectiveness of the Germans. If they're capable of doing this against our most elite troops, then what else are they capable of doing? So again, it all feeds into this sort of propaganda myth that the Germans, who are very good, are even better than that if they can best our Rangers. Their founder, Colonel William Darby, is absolutely beside himself. I mean, he goes into sort of almost suicidal depression because the Rangers just wiped out en masse.
The attacks on Cisterna and Campo Leone in the first Allied offensive are a disaster, and the Germans are just getting into their stride. On the Beachhead, the first units of a rapidly expanding Allied field hospital are overwhelmed by the early casualties.
In our first 36 hours, the hospital had admitted 1,129 battle casualties. Wounded sprawled everywhere in all the ward tents. Seeing so many men with bloody, mangled bodies horrified me. I had barely enough room to walk between the rows of litters in the dimly lit tent. Despite the numbers, it was eerily quiet. No one complained or cried out. A few with severe wounds asked only to be put to sleep.
To make matters worse, the hospital is far from safe, as artillery rains down on the beachhead.
Everywhere within that beachhead is in German artillery range. The Germans own all the hills surrounding Anzio with observation posts absolutely everywhere. So shells can rain down anywhere, literally anywhere, within the Anzio beachhead. The gun line is no more than about 10 miles away from the field hospital, which is almost on the beach. This place is under shell fire every single day.
The Germans shelled our hospital on February 10th. The shells killed 2 nurses and 1 enlisted man. The administration sent a detailed map of the hospital area to the German lines. Medical personnel are unarmed, and the Geneva Convention rules of war prohibit enemy activity against medical facilities. No one escaped the feeling of desperation that hung over the beachhead.
In the coming weeks, the hospital is attacked so many times that it will become known as Hell's Half-Acre. Disappointed with progress, Churchill writes to General Alexander.
It seems to have been a bad show. Penny and Truscott seem to have done admirably, considering what they were facing. Does Lucas have any idea what a mistake he has made?
Knowing he has failed, Lucas writes in his diary,
Well, my head will probably fall in the basket, but I have done my best. There were just too many Germans here for me to lick, and they could build up faster than I could. The condition in which I find myself is much better than I ever anticipated, or had any right to expect.
100,000 Allied troops now face 125,000 German infantry. The Allies are on the defensive, something they never expected.
German counterattacks at Anzio are absolutely vicious and bitter.
They used to come at you like devils, you know. A few grenades come over, and you wonder what's happening. Next thing you know, there's a row of Germans on their feet, blasting away with Smeisers, screaming and shouting. You jump out your trench and run for it.
Among the most feared guns deployed by the German army was the 88mm flak gun. Originally designed to bring down aircraft with high-powered shells travelling at almost a kilometre a second. Firing horizontally, they make short work of Allied tanks.
The 88 was the scariest gun you'd ever want to hear go off, because it was like a rifle. It had a flat trajectory, and when you heard the sound, the shell was hitting. That's how fast it was. Go boom, bang, and it hit almost immediately. And to have a German 88 shooting your way was a scary situation.
The 88 shell travels so fast that the first sound you hear is the ear-splitting crash of the shell burst. I wasn't counting, but there must have been about 5. All of my men were in their deep foxholes and seemed okay, but the general's aide had no foxhole. He was sitting on the floor of the ravine. As I came up beside him, I saw in profile that he had no face. He was choking from the blood in his throat. What can you do for a man like that? You feel helpless and frustrated because you know there is nothing you can do.
The disarray of Operation Shingle presents Hitler with an opportunity to destroy the Allies at Anzio. He orders Kesselring to drive them back into the sea, and Kesselring devises a counterattack designed to do just that. At 6 a.m., the Germans announce their assault with a dawn artillery barrage. Von Mackensen now drives his toughest units into the US lines. Hitler's orders are to press on until the whole of the beachhead has been reclaimed.
If the Germans break through and push you back, there's nowhere you can go except into the sea.
The following day, the Germans tear a wound over 3 kilometers wide in the American front line and advance over a kilometer. Now, just a short distance from the sea, von Mackensen commits all of his reserves. Facing annihilation, the Allies resort to sheer firepower, throwing every gun they can muster, and massive air attacks at the Germans.
I'd never been so frightened. We were all frightened. I turned to my mate before the off, and we shook hands. The order was given to advance, and we walked into bullets, mortar bombs, and shells. They were waiting for us. We didn't stand a chance. My mate Billy was killed by a sniper. I was shot through the shoulder and evacuated out. I was lucky. Out of our platoon, which was about 35 men, only 10 survived.
In the heat of the battle for Anzio, the normal rules of warfare come under severe strain. Choosing to surrender to your enemy in these conditions is to take your life in your hands.
As a soldier, your worst concern is that you're not going to survive the first few minutes, because you're more likely to surrender right in the middle of the fighting, in which case, you know, your opposite number will have their blood up and be thinking about their survival rather than yours. And the easiest thing to do, some of them might conclude in that scenario, is just to kill you and then just move on.
For Albert and his comrades, a decision whether to take a prisoner of war comes when a sniper who's killed several men in their unit attempts to surrender.
For some reason or other, this particular guy must have decided he'd had enough. And he put his hands up and stepped out into the clear where we could see him and walked towards us and laughing.
The laughing sniper hopes this will save him, but his surrender presents many in Albert's unit with very mixed feelings.
And he's sort of saying, sorry chaps, you know, I've had it. Well, a sergeant said, you haven't, I've had it. He jumped up, it was Anzio's had Thompson submachine guns. And he got up and he sprayed this guy, put him down in the middle of the field. This sergeant didn't think he was funny. You could understand it. He'd popped 2 or 3 blokes. And we're all saying, where's that bloody sniper? And all of a sudden he comes out and does this, knowing we're not going to shoot him. But of course, he got it wrong. Somebody did.
The Geneva Convention is very, very clear. As soon as a soldier has put their hands up and initiated that they're going to surrender, is you must not open fire on them, you must take them prisoner, but then you have to get them out of the danger area as quickly as possible.
We broke those Geneva Conventions probably every day of the week, both of us, both sides.
By the 19th of February, the Germans are a spent force. Hitler's bid to drive the Allies back in a decisive counterattack has failed. Almost 5,500 Germans lie dead in one of the smallest battlefields in history, and more than 2,000 Allied servicemen have been killed. The Germans' advance may have been halted, but the Allies are now pinned down along a narrow strip of coast. Alarmed at the situation, Alexander decides he must act to save the whole operation.
Alexander goes to meet Lucas, and he finds that Lucas spends most of his time in a basement, has no situational awareness, doesn't get out much to see the troops, and is really hiding. So when he goes to see Mark Clark, he says, it's not for me to tell you, but I've just met a broken reed.
Clark agrees that his general has failed and must be relieved. He replaces Lucas with the widely trusted and admired General Lucien Truscott.
Far sunnier, far more proactive, much younger. So it won't be for him to break out of the beachhead yet, but he's going to put a more positive gloss on what's happening there.
Truscott's appointment will restore trust and confidence, but he has few options to solve the crisis. Both sides are now too weak to fight a decisive battle.
It quickly developed into a stalemate. The Germans were unable to counterattack and drive the Allies back into the sea, but equally, the Anglo-Americans were unable to break out of the Anzio beachhead because even though they could bring the firepower to bear, it wasn't enough to take the hills in front of them and drive the German defenders out.
The Anzio stalemate becomes a savage duel of artillery. For the infantry, the only hope of survival lies underground.
I survived Anzio by digging foxholes. If I stopped anywhere, I dug a hole. And I had a hole ready to jump in, and I jumped in lots of them. We were under constant fire. Practically every day we were under some kind of shelling or some kind of bombing.
It's amazing how you get used to that, the bombing or shelling. I've been in situations later when shells have been going off there and I haven't even turned my head. Yeah, I think, oh, bloody hell, they're at it again. Look. If your name's on it, you're dead. If you're not, you'll be all right. Yeah, it's that attitude.
The Allies and Germans hammer each other with everything they can summon. Air superiority allows the Allies to relentlessly pound the enemy in heavy bombing raids. And the Germans roll out the biggest artillery piece in their armory. Capable of firing a 255-kilogram shell over 60 kilometers, the 200-ton Krupp K5 terrifies the Allied infantry. They call it Anzio Annie.
It was a huge gun mounted on a rail car. They were firing it back at the beach area. It was just a huge gun, and you could hear it going. As it cleared the air, And that big shell, and when it hit back there, it could level the better part of a block. And so we looked for Anzio Annie all the time because you could hear it. It was just that big swishing noise coming through the air over your head.
Alongside the giant gun, and equally feared and despised, are shoals of tiny cluster munitions, designed to maim unsuspecting troops in open foxholes.
The Allied troops were dug in a whole series of trenches overlooked by the Germans in the mountains on almost all sides of them. During the day, the Germans would plaster them with artillery, and particularly at night, they would use these. This is an S-2 butterfly bomb, a cluster munition, one of the first ever used. German aircraft would fly overhead and would release several hundred of these. You can see why it's got its name. Wings, offset plates. When it was dropped, it would spin to arm the fuse. Hundreds and hundreds were dropped at any one time, covering the battlefield. So if you were in an open trench, such as this, you had no protection. They could either be fused to detonate on impact, or delayed, so that you would think that it was no danger, or even worse, a disturbance fuse, so that if you went to kick it or throw it, that's when it would go up. Troops in Anzio hated this weapon. Make no mistake, Allied soldiers detested the butterfly.
Shingle was supposed to be a lightning operation of a few weeks' duration. By the end of April, it enters its third month, with no sign of any movement on either side. All eyes are on the Allies to pull out, but there's no sign of that either.
This is Winston Churchill's baby. This is his initiative, and so he's not willing to let it become a defeat without putting a lot more effort into it. And the end result is that rather than sensibly pulling the forces out of Anzio and just saying, look, it didn't work, let's try something else, the Americans and British kept reinforcing and supporting the troops there, and it turned into this god-awful battle that resembled nothing so much as the trench warfare of World War I.
The Allies could potentially break out of the beachhead if they had more men and more weapons, but once again, Shingle is overshadowed by a competing priority.
Just about the same time that Anzio is evolving into this stalemate, the Allies are ramping up for the Normandy invasion of D-Day. They need thousands of landing craft, hundreds of thousands of men, hundreds of ships, thousands of planes. All of those resources going to the Normandy invasion meant that they couldn't be going to reinforce Anzio. Anzio was just left there to fester. The Allies weren't willing to give up on it, but at the same time, they couldn't give it the kind of resources it needed to be successful.
The troops at Anzio now dubbed their battle the Sitzkrieg.
Warfare hasn't merely slowed down, it's completely stopped.
Life in an infantry trench, it's a subterranean, mole-like existence. Going outside of the trench is something you really don't want to do.
They sleep by day, they come out and patrol at night. And there's a steady drain of casualties as the Germans lob the odd shell over.
We're dug in here and the Germans are dug in 200 yards up there, and we can see each other, and occasionally we'll have a go at each other.
Stalemate conditions sometimes flash into terrifying confrontations. Patrols turn into full-scale firefights as infantry come face-to-face with the enemy at close range. Clearing a house can turn into a desperate race to kill or be killed.
I crashed through the door. It was a usual tactic. Crashed through the door and spray. Put everybody down. And I remember shooting a German, and he was at the bottom of some stairs. And I came in and sprayed, and he went down, and I ran over his body, and he's lying there. And I looked at him and I thought, blimey, he's as young as I am. And I felt rotten about that. Killing somebody my own age wasn't on somehow.
It's the end of April, and with the Normandy landings just over a month away, the Allies need to make the most of every strategic advantage they have. The breakout from Anzio is now an urgent priority, and General Alexander devises a plan to both solve the problem and put maximum pressure on the Germans just in time for D-Day in France. In a double breakout, Alexander plans to crush 2 German armies in a pincer movement and drive the Germans out of Italy for good. The Allies at Monte Cassino will force the Germans defending the ruined monastery to retreat north towards Rome, just as the Allied troops from Anzio break out of the beachhead to trap them.
Alexander's plan is the fusion of these two Allied encampments, those at Monte Cassino and those at Anzio. They're coming together and the Germans being squeezed. And it's crucial that the Allies at Anzio don't break out too soon, because the Germans will get wise to what's going on.
The success of the plan depends on perfect timing and exceptional cooperation between Field Marshal Alexander and General Clark. If it works, it could result in a decisive victory for the Allies in Italy. It's codenamed Operation Diadem, and on the 11th of May, it's launched with a massive assault on German lines at Monte Cassino.
Troops coming from the south attacking the Germans from one direction, and the troops from Anzio attacking them from another. The Germans will be surrounded, both their 14th and 10th armies destroyed, and that will be the end of the Italian campaign, because there will be no more German troops in Italy.
On the 23rd of May, the Allies at Anzio break out, while to the south, Alexander finally penetrates the Gustav line, forcing the Germans north.
To begin with, that all goes swimmingly well. It doesn't take long for the Germans to start retreating, with the Allies in hot pursuit.
As his forces break into central Italy, Mark Clark reviews his options. He knows that Alexander is fully expecting him to crush the Germans retreating from Monte Cassino as the other arm of the pincer movement.
Mark Clark, always publicity hungry, had a press corps of at least 50 people dedicated to news media and communication. So he sends his troops not to cut off the German army and in defiance of orders, but to go to Rome, because he knows that that will put him on the front page of all the world's newspapers. The liberator of Rome. I mean, it's one of the most famous cities in the world.
It's the last thing Alexander wants, and it's a disaster for Operation Diadem.
What Clark was supposed to do was not to march on Rome, but actually to chase the German defenders so that the attacking Allies from the south could march into the Italian capital city. But Clark being Clark, that wasn't good enough for him. He had to be the liberator of Rome.
This has gone down incredibly badly in history. Because what happens? The two German armies are allowed to escape. The Italian theatre, which could have stopped in May 1944, carries on until the 1st of May 1945, so that's almost 12 months additional of fighting.
It's a remarkable disobedience, and if he hadn't been as high up the command chain as he had been, the punishment could have been quite spectacular.
Clark's hunger for publicity does not reward him as he hopes. He's remembered more for his disobedience and betrayal of Diadem than for his liberation of Rome.
There are people who say, Mark Clark, you've got blood on your hands. You were given the chance to bottle up and defeat these retreating German armies. You didn't take it, and instead you stayed in Rome collecting fur coats.
Instead of bringing the Italian campaign to a swift end, a year later, British and American soldiers would still be dying fighting the remnants of the German army in Italy.
My division lost 3,000 men killed or wounded in the first 3 days. The streets were littered with corpses, destroyed vehicles, and collapsed buildings. Fires were everywhere from artillery and white phosphorus. We choked on smoke and cement dust from the shattered buildings. This was what hell must be like.
The war in Italy came to an abrupt end for Albert Darlington at Christmas 1944, when he was out on patrol in the Po Valley.
88mm come out. I was badly hit, both legs, stomach. This hand was smashed to pulp, and this hand was broken. 5 years before I was walking again properly. Even then I was walking with an iron on my leg. Yeah.
But Albert was among the lucky ones. In the final year of the war in Italy, 60 to 70,000 Allied servicemen would lose their lives before victory in Northern Europe finally brought the fighting to an end.